Welcome, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu Melech Haolam, Asher Kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Thank you. All right, so let's go back and look at the verse a little bit. Here we go. All right. Uven shmonat yamim yimol lachem kol zachar ledorotechem. So we actually looked at this, right? In other words, at 8 days old, every male among your generations shall be circumcised for you. Here we go. Yelid Bayit, one born of the house, Miknat Kesef, or one purchased through money, Michol b'nei meichar, from anyone who is a stranger, in other words, who's not Jewish, asher lo mizarachahu, who is not from your seed. So exactly what do we mean by Yelid Bayit and Yelid Miknat Kesef? What do we mean by this? And that's what we're going to take a look at. Tanya. So there's an early source, right, of Mishnaic origins, in other words, prior to the year 200. Ezahu Yelid Bayit. What are we talking about if we're talking about a Yelid Bayit, one born in the house? The Ezahu Miknat Kesef. And what are we talking about if we're talking about a Miknat Kesef, one purchased through silver, through money? Here we are. Lakach Shivcha Venit Avra Etzlo. If he took a maidservant and she became pregnant while purchased, in other words, when he was there, when she was with him there, V'yalda, and she gave birth, or another case, Shelakach Shivcha le'uvara, that he took in other words, and basically it means he brought her into the house, he acquired her, right, a maidservant, right, for her fetus. In other words, we're going to clarify what we mean by this, as you can see. What do we mean? He took her for her fetus. Here we go. Let's find the place. She'ein lo bischut guf hashivcha. That is to say, he has no rights to the woman's body, klum, at all. Rak bevladoteha, but only her offspring. In other words, when he acquired this woman, he did not acquire her, but he acquired her for the sake of the fact that she was pregnant and would give birth, and acquiring that particular offspring. So it's a legal thing. We have to do with defining the sale in a special kind of way. But this is all Yelid Bayit. In other words, we're looking at any possibilities of a child being born, in this particular case, through someone who is not Jewish, right, and whom he brought into his home. And there are two possibilities. One is that he actually acquired the woman and the child she was going to have. And in another case where he only acquired the woman for the sake of her producing a child. Okay, so that's Yelid Bayit. Zehu Yelid Bayit. That's what we're talking about. That's what the Torah is talking about when it's talking about a Yelid Bayit. Lakach Shivcha Me'uberet, if in fact he acquired a maidservant who was already pregnant, V'yalda, and she gave birth, or Shelakach Shivcha Uvlada Ima, or if he acquired a maidservant and her child was with her, right? Her born child was with her. Zehu Miknat Kesef. Here we are talking about a purchase, right? Acquisition in that sense. Okay? Those cases. Veyesh pratei chalukim badin kol echad. And when we look at each one of these cases, that is the Yelid Bayit and the Miknat Kesef, within those categories, there are different details, and we're going to see what those details are. Yesh Yelid Bayit Shenimol Lishmona. In one case, there's a child who's a Yelid Bayit, who would be circumcised at 8 days. And what's the situation? V'hu keshelakach shivcha, right? It's when he acquired this maidservant, v'nit abra etzlo, and she became pregnant by him, right? Either possibly it could mean either through him, or possibly if he had given her to another servant, perhaps. Either way, I mean, the point is that for me, there's some ambiguity by saying she became pregnant with him. Etzel means sort of near when she was within his domain, V'yalda, and she then gave birth. Okay, then that's a case where the child is circumcised at 8 days. Aval, however, Yelid Bayit ba'ofen sheni, but if the child was a Yelid Bayit in a second way, shelakach shivcha leubara, in the case, that's the second case where he acquired the maidservant for the sake of her offspring, right? Nimol lo to yam sheladat. In that case, the child is circumcised on the day of its birth. Now you understand the differing details. Ukefi yitpaer, and as will be explained, v'chein chiluk din Miknat Kesef. Likewise, in a case of purchase, right, acquisition through purchase, ki keshelakach shivcha me'uberet, because at that point, right, she was already pregnant, right, when he purchased the shivcha, the yalda, and in that case, then she gave birth after she had been acquired. Nimo lishmona, the child is circumcised at 8 days. Ukeshelakach shivcha vevalda ima. However, if he acquired a maidservant and she already had the child, nimo lo to yom shenolad, he would be circumcised. It says the day. Okay, let's make sure I have this right. Yeah, because here it says she's pregnant, right? I think here she gave birth and then he acquired her. That's the point here. Nimolo toyum shenolad. Here he's saying the child is circumcised on the day that it was born. In other words, this rule of the 8th day for circumcision in the cases that we mentioned does not apply. Okay, so we have some questions to answer. The tam hadavar b'chol, and the rationale of this matter, right, in all of this, mishum, why? Detrei krae ketive belid bait miknat kesef. First of all, it's because there are actually 2 scriptural verses that make reference to a Yelid Bayit and a Miknat Kesef. So let me show you what they are. Here we are. So we just had the one which said that it had to be circumcised, that the baby had to be circumcised at 8 days. But let's take a look at the very next verse. Here we go. Himo yimo, it will absolutely be circumcised. Here we go. Yelid Bayitcha, so there's that Yelid Bayit a second time. Umiknat kaspacha, and your acquisition through silver. V'haita briti, and my covenant, b'vsarchem levrit olam, will be in their flesh eternally. Okay, so now you see that this is mentioned twice. Okay, so let's keep going here. Okay, question? Does somebody want to mention something? Hold on. Okay, let's find it. Find the place. I want to find the right place here. Sorry. Does somebody want to say something? Sorry? Yeah? Go on. Here we are. All right. Here's where we are. Right. Okay, so he says, right? Okay. Kan here in this verse that we're looking at right now, uvasuk haba, and in the next verse. V'chan mefaresh shiur shmona yamim, and here in this verse it specifies that time period of 8 days. Upapasuk haba, but in the next verse, eino mefaresh, it does not define it, right? It doesn't specify it. Umistabra, and we could reason, dahai de mefaresh be lishmona, that in a case where it details that the child must be circumcised at 8 days, hainu hechi, it's going to be in a case, those cases, de dami li Yisrael me'alya. That is to say, because in this case, the child would appear to be similar to a full-blown Israelite. Shinolad beveito shel Yisrael. Why? Because he is born in the house of the Israelite me'asher kana'or, after after it was I think it means through purchase. In other words, because the purchase was made, okay, right, or acquired, that for that reason the child was now, or the maidservant was actually in the house of the Israelite, and therefore when the child came into this world, or was in this world, or was like an Israelite. Dedumya de lachem, right? Because this is similar to when it's talking about lachem, for you, which you own, in other words. Ba'enan, right? We require dichtiv, because b'pasuk zeh, it says in this particular verse that's talking about the 8 days, yimol lachem, right? Kol zachar. In other words, every male, and I think the way he's reading it will be, I could translate the way it's looking, right? Shall be circumcised to you every male. V'hadar Yelid Bayit umiknat Kesef. And after it says that baby must be circumcised at 8 days, afterwards it then says the one who is born of the household, and one who is purchased. Hilkach, and for this reason, lakach shivcha, if he took a maidservant. And sometimes lakach can mean that he married her, in a sense, right? That although that raises other questions, but we understand it means that she now is part of his household. V'nit abra etzlo, and while she was with him, she became pregnant. Heve Yelid Bayit, in that case, it's going to be that baby is going to be a Lid Bayit, a one born of the household, Dumya de Lachem, which looks very much like the Lachem. We can say that's the case of Lachem. Shaharei Lolad Birshut Yisrael. Why? Because he was born in the place. The Rishut means the domain of an Israelite. V'nimol lishmona, and so he is circumcised at 8 days. Aval lakach shivcha leubara. But if he acquired this maidservant for the sake of her unborn child, right? I believe it means literally for the sake of her fetus. Lo have dumya de lachem. We don't say that this is similar to a situation of lachem. Why? Ho'il ve'ein lo chelek be'imor. Why? Because he does not have any right or any part of the child's mother, right? Lachein nimol lo toyom. And for this reason, this child is going to be born that very same day when it's born, and that's like that second verse that talks about it. V'chein b'miknat kesef, and likewise in a case of purchase, lakach shivcha me'uberet, he purchased a maidservant who was pregnant, v'yalda, and she gave birth after she had been purchased. Nimol lishmona, that child is going to be circumcised at 8 days. Dedumya de lachem. Why? Because that's very similar to a case of the Israelite born in your home, right? who it is, Shenolad Birshut Yisrael. Why? Because he is actually born in the Israelites' domain. Aval lakach shivcha v'vlada ima, but in a case where he acquired a maidservant along with her newborn child, shekvar yeladato, that is to say, she's already given birth to that baby. V'af al pi shelo avro alav shmona yamim, avru alav shmona yamim, and so despite the fact that 8 days have not transpired, leledato, to its birth, nimo miyad, it is going to be circumcised immediately. So we're talking essentially, right, that this whole law of 8 days, which is the minimum amount of time that we allow before the baby is circumcised, only applies to the cases we mentioned, does not apply to this case, kidichtiv. Why? Because in that second verse it says, imol yimol, right? It says he must be certainly circumcised, de lav dumya de lachemhu, because on the one hand, it must be circumcised, the child must be circumcised, the baby, but it is not a case of lachem, right, of for you or to you. V'ien b'piresh Rashi b'pasuk zeh, and if you check out Rashi's interpretation for this verse, piresh Miknat Kesef, there he explains the concept of Miknat Kesef, right, of purchase through silver, sheknano mishenolad. There he says that he acquired the child once it was born, after it was born. V'hinei, but here, afal pi shekafi shenit abba, right, and so despite the fact, right, or shenit aber, right, even though, let's see, sorry, shenit ba'er, and even though, as we explained, ire miknat kesef b'pasuk zeh, that the term of miknat kesef shebekasuk zeh, that's in this verse, right? We explained it, right? Gam ken shenolad birshoto shel Yisrael, that the idea of that the child was born while in the Israelites' domain, right? So here Rashi seems to be saying it isn't, and we had explained that the whole idea of it being circumcised on the 8th day was that somehow it was born while in the domain of the Israelite. Rak nit aber mikodem, but just the fact that she became pregnant prior to her acquisition. Sharei pasuk zeh, right? Why? Because the first verse, right? The first verse that deals with the Miknat Kesef and the Yelid Bayit, right? Ire binimol lishmona, because that first verse we're saying refers to those cases where the child is circumcised at 8 days. For imkain, and if this is the case, hava leila Rashi, if this is the case, Rashi should have lefaresh zeh, right? He should have explained that term, miknat kesef, right? Bepasuk haba, in the next verse, the ire benimola yom echad, because that verse is dealing with a child that is born on the same day it was born, etc., or very close to it, prior to 8 days is the point. Tzarich lomar. So we have to say, why did Rashi not do this? And let me show you before I get to that. I'll try and find this place quickly. All right, here. Let me go back. It's on this verse. This is the verse, right? Let's make sure I have it. Yeah, this is the verse that's talking about the 8 days, right? And here's the Rashi, Yelid Bayit, Sheyiladato Hashicha Babayit, right? That the maidservant gave birth to it while in the house. Umiknat Kesef, and here we go. This is what he was referring to, and purchased Shekanao Mishinolad, who acquired it once it was already born. And we were saying that in those sorts of situations, it is circumcised on the same day. That's the issue he is dealing with right now. Let me find the place here. Yes, here we go. All right. right here. Tzarich lomar. So how do we explain this, right? De lo nachit kan Rashi, that Rashi wasn't putting stuff down here, the faresh prate adin. Rashi wasn't involved in explaining the details of this law. He was just trying to explain the various situations that went on. Rak lefalesh, but only to explain, klal ha'inyan, to explain the general circumstances that are going on here, Yelid Bayit, Miknat Kesef, from one that is born in the household and one who is acquired through silver. Vestam, let me find out, Miknat Kesef, right? And in general, if we're talking about one purchased, right, Keshikna'o Mishinolad, we know that that generally means that baby was acquired after it had been born. Vidok, and this makes sense. All right. Very, very, if we went for a sleigh ride yesterday or last time, this one was an even bumpier sleigh ride. But there, as you can see, there are 4 cases, right? And 2 cases where the baby is circumcised 8 days old, and two circumstances where the baby is basically circumcised immediately. And I'm going to stop here for today. And I'll stop the share. Okay. So this is really looking carefully at this. Again, I would say, if I were to say, the aesthetics of this have to do, of course, with how much one takes very seriously this idea of loving God and seeing the Torah as basically helping us understand the divine will. And if in loving God, we want to try and understand the divine will as deeply as we can and as carefully as we can. All right. Having said that, any questions?
Yeah, what happened to the father?
I'm not sure what you're saying.
I'm saying that
Oh,
if you acquire a pregnant woman, you should
yes.
acquire the father also.
Oh, okay.
He is with the child. That's his child.
Okay. All right. So there were circumstances that are actually even mentioned in the Torah where a person was so impoverished, there are various circumstances where they would sell their child because they were so poor. I mean, we're dealing with a society where the idea of acquiring individuals was an acceptable practice. And we know in the case, and Harlan, you are familiar with it, of an Israelite slave, okay, who is essentially sold by a court to pay for his theft, okay? And if the owner gives him a maidservant and she becomes pregnant, while he will go free after 7 years or whatever the period of time is, right?
Yeah.
She goes out, I think, but I believe, if I'm remembering this correctly, that the maidservant and her child remain the property of the owner, the ultimate owner. So these are hard laws for us to be able to, assimilate in our own time. But, the Torah has to deal with reality regardless of the culture or regardless of the situation. So it requires further thinking, no question about it. David, I think you wanted to, or me, did you want to say something?
No,
David.
Does it matter whether the maidservant is Jewish?
Oh, the point is that the maidservant at this point is not. Remember, we were talking about situations where it said from non-Jewish people. Okay, here's the thing. When that baby is circumcised, and this is something that comes out in the course of discussing these things in the Talmud, the moment that baby is circumcised, in some sense, it is now partially Jewish. It is part, or should I try and use a little more careful nomenclature and say it's partially Israelite. And we know that in those sorts of cases, for example, with Pesach, where it says that a non-Israelite is not supposed to partake of sacrifices, and certainly not of the Pesach, in this case, they do. These particular individuals do. And I'm going to assume that the woman also would, if she's part of the household, would as well. I'm assuming. But it says explicitly that people in this situation do. So there'd only be one other part for this person to do, this person who was circumcised, and that is to go to a mikveh and be immersed for the sake of conversion.
You're saying that a non-Jew can be converted to a Jew, you're talking about.
This we know, yes. A non-Israelite can become an Israelite through conversion, through belief, in one ultimate creator and in the mitzvot, and in believing that they're responsible for performing commandments.
Okay. Yeah.
So, okay. Any other comments before I release you? Okay. Well, we're just shy. Yes. Take care. I'm assuming that goodbye. Yes, I realize. So I will give you my farewell.
Have a nice Shabbos, everyone.
Have a good Shabbos.
Yes,
Take care.
Good Shabbos.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Good Shabbos. Bye.
Bye-bye.